In 1950, a young Navy veteran walked into Columbia Records with nothing but a guitar and determination. Within just 5 years, he would earn more #1 hits than Hank Williams Sr. had in his entire career. Yet today, many country music fans have never heard his name. Carl Smith, the man they called Mr. Country, sold his estate, packed away his guitar, and disappeared from the spotlight at the height of his fame. While his ex-wife June Carter and her new husband Johnny Cash became country music royalty, Smith chose a different path that left fans wondering, what makes a country music legend walk away from it all? The story of Carl Smith isn't just about music. It's about choosing between stardom and happiness, about family ties that would shape country music for generations, and about a man who decided that some things matter more than fame. The year was 1927, and in the small town of Maynardville, Tennessee, where the mountains meet the valley, Carl Smith took his first breath. His family wasn't rich in money, but their home was filled with the sounds of the Grand Ole Opry crackling through their radio every Saturday night. Young Carl would press his ear against the speaker, soaking in every note, every twang, every story told through song. Little did those Opry stars know they were shaping the future of country music through a boy who could barely afford a guitar. But Carl Smith wasn't the type to let poverty stand in his way. While other kids his age were playing baseball or doing their homework, he was walking door to door, selling seeds to anyone who would buy them. Every penny, every nickel, every dime went into a mason jar labeled guitar lessons. That mason jar wasn't just collecting money, it was collecting dreams. By 15, those guitar lessons had paid off. Carl wasn't just playing anymore. He was performing with Kitty Dibble and her dude Ranch Wranglers. Picture it, a teenage boy still growing into his boots, sharing stages with seasoned performers. But life had other plans before music could fully claim him. World War II was raging across the oceans, and in 1944, that same teenage performer traded his guitar for a Navy uniform. For 3 years, the only music Carl made was aboard Navy ships. But those years weren't wasted. They were building something in him. The discipline of military life, the stories of his fellow sailors, the rhythm of the waves. All of it would later find its way into his music. When he returned home in 1947, he wasn't just Carl Smith, the talented teenager anymore. He was Carl Smith, the veteran. Carl Smith, the man who had seen the world. Carl Smith, who was ready to make his mark on country music. Back in Tennessee, the local radio stations became his proving ground. Every morning, he'd wake up before dawn to perform on WROL in Knoxville. Then he'd drive to WDXD in Knoxville for another show. Some days he'd hit 3 or 4 stations, playing until his fingers were raw and his voice was hoarse. But people were starting to notice. They'd call in asking for that smooth-voiced boy who sang like he'd lived every word of his songs. And then came the day that would change everything. His first appearance on the stage of the very same Grand Ole Opry he used to listen to through that crackling radio. Standing in the wings, waiting to perform, he probably thought about that young boy with his ear pressed against the speaker. But now he wasn't just listening to the music, he was about to make it. The way Carl Smith rose from those humble Tennessee beginnings would become one of country music's most compelling stories. But what happened when he finally got his shot at Columbia Records? Well, that's where things really get interesting. That Columbia Records contract in 1950 wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a match-striking gunpowder. Within months, Carl Smith's voice was pouring out of radios across America, and his first hit was about to change everything. When Let's Live a Little climbed to #2 on the Billboard Country Chart in 1951, it wasn't just a song, it was a declaration that a new star had arrived. But it wasn't just Carl's voice that set him apart. The Tunesmiths, his backing band, had a secret weapon: steel guitarist Johnny Silbert. Together, they weren't just playing country music, they were reinventing it, weaving Western swing into traditional country like threads of gold in a tapestry. When they performed, dance halls didn't just come alive, they caught fire. The combination of Smith's smooth baritone and Silbert's innovative steel guitar work created a sound that was both familiar and completely new. The hits started falling like summer rain. Loose Talk topped the charts, becoming the soundtrack of summer 1955. Hey Joe had everyone from Nashville to New York singing along. You Are the One became the song young couples danced to at their weddings. Each release seemed to climb higher than the last. And by the mid-50s, Carl Smith wasn't just releasing songs, he was releasing anthems. 30 top 10 Billboard hits in a single decade. Numbers like that didn't just make you successful, they made you a legend. His performances at the Grand Ole Opry became must-see events. Fans would line up for hours just to catch a glimpse of the man they called Mr. Country. The energy when he took the stage was electric. Here was a performer who understood that country music wasn't just about the songs, it was about the stories they told and the people they touched. Every Saturday night, he'd stand in that circle of light on the Opry stage, and for a few minutes, everyone in that audience felt like he was singing just to them. But while everyone else was looking at the charts, Carl was looking at something different. He saw how the music was changing, how it was evolving. The rise of rockabilly and the early stirrings of what would become the Nashville sound were reshaping country music. He didn't just want to ride the wave, he wanted to help shape it. His shows weren't just concerts, they were master classes in how country music could sound. The way he blended traditional country with Western swing wasn't just innovative, it was revolutionary. Those who worked with him during these years tell stories about a man who was never satisfied with good enough. In the studio, he'd record take after take until every note was perfect. Sound engineers remember sessions that would run into the early hours of the morning, because Smith could hear something in the mix that wasn't quite right. On stage, he rehearsed until every movement was natural as breathing. This wasn't just perfectionism, it was respect for the music and the fans who loved it. By 1956, Carl Smith wasn't just a star, he was Mr. Country, a title he earned through years of dedication to his craft. His influence could be heard in the songs of countless up-and-coming artists who studied his style and tried to capture that magic blend of traditional country and Western swing. But success has a way of changing things, of opening doors you never knew existed, and closing others you thought would always be open. And for Carl, those changes were about to come knocking in a big way. Standing at the peak of his success, looking out over a landscape of hit records and packed venues, Carl Smith had a decision to make, the kind of decision that doesn't just change a career, it changes a life. And speaking of life-changing moments, the story of how he balanced his skyrocketing career with his equally fascinating personal life is where things get really interesting. When Carl Smith met June Carter backstage at the Grand Ole Opry in 1951, it wasn't just another backstage encounter, it was country music history in the making. June, the daughter of the legendary Mother Maybelle Carter, was already making waves with her comedy routines and musical talent. Their courtship was swift, passionate, and set against the backdrop of Nashville's golden age. They married in 1952, and for a while, it seemed like country music had found its new royal couple. Their voices blended perfectly on duets like Time's A-Wastin' and Love Oh Crazy Love. When they performed together, audiences didn't just hear two singers, they witnessed two souls connecting through music. Their chemistry on stage was electric, their harmonies seamless. The birth of their daughter Carleen in 1955 seemed to complete their fairy tale. But life on the road isn't kind to fairy tales. The constant touring, the pressure of maintaining hit after hit, and the challenges of balancing family life with stardom began to take their toll. The same passion that brought them together started pulling them apart. By 1956, the marriage that had seemed so perfect from the outside crumbled. Their divorce sent shockwaves through Nashville's tight-knit music community. Yet sometimes the end of one chapter opens the door to another. Enter Goldie Hill, the vibrant country singer known for her hit, I Let the Stars Get in My Eyes. She wasn't just another pretty face in country music. She was a force of nature with a voice that could shake the rafters of any honky-tonk in Tennessee. When she and Carl began performing together, something clicked. Their musical styles complemented each other perfectly, but more importantly, they understood each other on a deeper level. Their marriage in 1957 wasn't just a wedding, it was a new beginning. Together, they had 3 children, Carl Jr., Larry Dean, and Lori Lynn. The Smith household became a place where music and family life intertwined seamlessly. Goldie understood something about Carl that perhaps others hadn't, his need for balance between the spotlight and the simple life. Meanwhile, June Carter's path led her to Johnny Cash, creating an unexpected connection between 3 of country music's biggest names. The web of relationships that linked Smith, Carter, and Cash would influence country music for generations. Their children grew up in a world where music wasn't just a career, it was the family business. But as the 1950s drew to a close, Carl Smith was wrestling with questions that would define the rest of his life. The music industry was changing rapidly. Elvis Presley had exploded onto the scene, and the Nashville sound was transforming country music into something slicker, more polished. Some artists chased the trends, but Carl had always walked his own path. In 1956, he made a decision that shocked many. He left the Grand Ole Opry. For a country music star in the 1950s, leaving the Opry was like a priest leaving the church. But Carl saw opportunities beyond those hallowed halls. The Philip Morris Country Music Show offered him a chance to tour the country on his own terms, reaching audiences that had never seen him perform live. His children remember those years fondly. Their father coming home from tour, guitar in hand, ready to share new stories and songs. Despite his success, he remained grounded, teaching his kids the value of hard work and authenticity. The Smith family farm in Franklin, Tennessee, became his sanctuary, a place where he could be himself away from the bright lights and backstage drama. As the 1960s approached, Carl Smith stood at another crossroads. The industry that had made him a star was evolving, and he had to decide whether to change with it or forge his own path. But before we explore that pivotal decision, let's talk about how he managed to expand his entertainment career beyond just music, because that's where things get particularly fascinating. While most country stars were content to stick to their lane, Carl Smith saw opportunities beyond the rhinestone suits and radio plays. 1957 marked his debut on the silver screen in The Badge of Marshall Brennan. Here was a country singer who could actually act, not just play himself with a different name. His natural charm translated perfectly to film, and Buffalo Gun soon followed, proving his first role wasn't just beginner's luck. The late 1950s and early 1960s saw Carl Smith reinventing himself in ways that would have made his seed-selling younger self proud. When he stepped into the role of host for Carl Smith's Country Music Hall on Canadian television, he brought something different to the screen. This wasn't just another country music show. It was a masterclass in how to evolve with the times while keeping your roots intact. His music during this period reflected this evolution. The Western swing influence that had always been part of his sound took center stage. Working with his band, he created arrangements that honored tradition while pushing boundaries. Songs like Deep Water and 10,000 Drums showed an artist who wasn't afraid to experiment with his sound, even at the risk of alienating some traditionalists. But perhaps the most surprising turn in Carl Smith's journey came when he discovered a new passion, one that had nothing to do with performing. On his farm in Franklin, Tennessee, he began raising cutting horses. These weren't just any horses. They were athletes in their own right, trained to work with cattle in a way that required precision, intelligence, and grace. The same attention to detail that had made him a recording perfectionist now went into breeding and training these magnificent animals. The transition wasn't as strange as it might seem. The discipline required to train cutting horses wasn't so different from the dedication needed to perfect a song. Both demanded patience, understanding, and an appreciation for the art of timing. His farm became more than just a retreat from show business. It evolved into a respected operation in the cutting horse community. By the late 1970s, the boy who once pressed his ear against a radio speaker listening to the Grand Ole Opry had become a man who had achieved everything he dreamed of and discovered dreams he never knew he had. The music industry was changing again, with the outlaw movement and pop country gaining momentum. But Carl Smith wasn't chasing trends anymore. He had found something that gave him the same satisfaction as music, without the constant pressure to stay relevant in an ever-changing industry. What made this period particularly interesting was how Smith managed to balance his gradual retreat from the spotlight with maintaining his legacy. He didn't just disappear, he made a conscious choice to step back on his own terms. His occasional performances during this time were treated like special events, each one a reminder of why they called him Mr. Country. The country music establishment couldn't ignore his contributions, even as he focused more on his horses than his hits. His influence could be heard in the work of countless artists who followed in his footsteps, though many of them might not have even realized it. The smooth vocal style, the perfect phrasing, the way he could tell a story through song, these became part of country music's DNA. But what makes a man walk away from fame when he's still got more to give? The answer lies in understanding what Carl Smith valued most and how those values would shape not just his legacy, but the future of country music through generations of his family. Speaking of legacy, the way the country music world would eventually recognize his contributions tells us something profound about how success can be measured in ways that have nothing to do with chart positions or record sales. The doors of the Country Music Hall of Fame opened for Carl Smith in 2003, though by then, he was more likely to be found in his barn than on any stage. It wasn't just another award. It was recognition that sometimes the greatest impact comes from knowing when to step away. That ceremony in 2003 brought out faces from every era of country music, each with a story about how Carl Smith had influenced their journey. His daughter Carlene Carter's voice broke as she spoke at the induction. She wasn't just remembering a country music legend. She was talking about the father who taught her that authenticity matters more than accolades. By then, she had carved out her own impressive career, proving that musical talent ran deep in the family genes. The Smith-Carter-Cash musical dynasty had reshaped country music in ways no one could have predicted back when Carl first walked into Columbia Records. But it wasn't just his daughter carrying his legacy forward. Every young artist who dared to blend traditional country with new sounds was walking a path Carl Smith had helped clear. His early experiments with Western swing had shown that country music could evolve without losing its soul. In recording studios across Nashville, you could still hear engineers talking about the Carl Smith standard, that relentless pursuit of the perfect take. The cutting horse community, too, had their own stories about Carl Smith. They didn't talk about his hit records or his movies. They talked about his eye for good stock, his patience with difficult horses, his understanding that excellence takes time. The trophies his horses won sat right alongside his gold records, each representing a different kind of perfection he'd pursued. When Carl Smith passed away on January 16, 2010, at his beloved farm in Franklin, Tennessee, the obituaries tried to capture his essence. They listed his 30 top 10 hits, mentioned his marriages to June Carter and Goldie Hill, noted his contributions to film and television, but they missed something crucial. The way he had shown that there could be a life after stardom, that walking away at the right time could be as powerful as holding on. His influence echoes through country music in unexpected ways. Modern country stars might not name him as an influence, but every time they step away from pure tradition to try something new, they're following his example. When they balance family life with career demands, they're wrestling with the same questions Carl Smith answered in his own unique way. The real measure of his legacy isn't in the numbers, though they're impressive enough. It's not in the Hall of Fame induction, though it was well-deserved. It's in the way he showed that success isn't just about reaching the top. It's about knowing what to do when you get there. His journey from selling seeds to buy a guitar to selling out arenas, from listening to the Grand Ole Opry on a crackling radio to becoming one of its biggest stars, that was just the first act. But perhaps the most profound part of Carl Smith's story is what it tells us about authenticity in an industry built on image. Here was a man who reached the pinnacle of country music success, then walked away to raise horses because it made him happy. He didn't need to make a comeback, didn't need to chase relevance. He had found something more valuable than fame. He had found contentment. Today, when you visit the Country Music Hall of Fame, you'll find Carl Smith's plaque among those of other legends. But to truly understand his legacy, you need to look beyond those walls, to the artists who dare to be different, to the performers who choose their own path, and to a family that continues to make music on their own terms. The story of Carl Smith, Mr. Country himself, isn't just about what he achieved. It's about the courage it takes to define success on your own terms. That seed-selling boy from Maynardville never could have imagined how far his dreams would take him. 30 top 10 hits, countless performances, movies, television shows, and a legacy that continues to influence country music today. But Carl Smith's greatest achievement wasn't in the music he made. It was in showing us that true success means having the courage to walk away when your heart calls you elsewhere. The name Mr. Country turned out to be too small for a man who refused to be defined by a single passion. While his contemporaries chased changing trends and fought to stay relevant, Carl Smith chose a different path. He traded spotlight for sunlight, stage doors for barn doors, and found that sometimes the sweetest songs are the ones that are never recorded. His story challenges our very notion of what success in the music industry looks like. His influence lives on through his children, especially Carleen Carter, who inherited not just his musical talents, but his independent spirit. The extended Smith-Carter-Cash family tree has grown into a musical forest, each branch adding its own melody to the country music songbook. But perhaps more importantly, they inherited his understanding that there's more to life than just making music. Each generation has learned to balance artistry with authenticity, fame with family, just as Carl did. The ripple effects of his decisions continue to shape country music in subtle but profound ways. When modern artists take breaks from touring to spend time with family, they're following a path Carl Smith helped blaze. When performers choose artistic integrity over commercial success, they're drawing from his playbook. Even as country music evolves with each passing year, the principles he stood for, authenticity, excellence, and balance, remain as relevant as ever. His legacy extends far beyond music. In the cutting horse community, tales of his dedication still circulate. They talk about how he approached horse training with the same perfectionism he once brought to the recording studio. Each carefully bred bloodline, each meticulously trained horse, represents a different kind of hit record. One measured not in chart positions, but in the quiet satisfaction of doing something right. Look around Nashville today, and you'll find Carl Smith's fingerprints everywhere. In the artists who dare to blend traditional country with new sounds, in the performers who prioritize family over fame, in the producers who won't settle for good enough. His influence isn't just in the music, it's in the way artists approach their careers, their families, and their lives after the spotlight fades. Sometimes the measure of a life isn't in how long you stay in the spotlight, but in what you do when you step out of it. Carl Smith showed us that reinvention isn't just about changing your sound or your style. It's about having the courage to follow your heart, even when it leads you down an unexpected trail. His journey from country music star to horse breeder isn't a story of giving up. It's a story of growing up, of recognizing that success comes in many forms. The true power of Carl Smith's legacy lies not just in what he achieved, but in what he proved was possible. He showed that you can walk away from fame without losing yourself, that you can find new dreams after achieving your first ones, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose happiness over acclaim. So next time you hear someone ask, "Whatever happened to Carl Smith?" tell them he didn't disappear. He just found a different kind of spotlight, one that shone on green pastures instead of stage lights, on family dinners instead of dinner shows, on a life lived exactly the way he wanted to live it. In doing so, he wrote his greatest hit, a life story that proves success isn't about how many people know your name, but about being true to yourself no matter where that truth leads you. That's not just a country music story. That's a human story. And in the end, isn't that what country music is really all about?